And there we go. So this is our Mentoring from Within and Doula from Within Module 5 live call. And today is June, I have to look at my calendar because this week is going so crazy. Today is June 18th, 2019. So, Nikki, do you want to do a little check-in and just kind of tell me, I'm sorry that I haven't gotten you your checklist. Thanks for the nudge. I have it mostly done. I just have to make it in a format I can share it with you. So I will do that today.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm starting to catch up. I just wrapped up module 4.
Oh, good. Okay.
The test or whatever you call the assessment at the end. I do have a meeting with a couple of moms this afternoon. So that'll be my first live meeting with pregnant women. They're both second-time moms, and I haven't yet decided which thing to do. So I'd love to know your suggestion on what would be a good place to start. I was thinking about I'd like to do one birth art session maybe, and maybe either non-focused awareness or finding the center. But I kind of feel like I'm still don't have my head wrapped around finding the center yet.
Okay.
And they're both second-time moms, and I'm pretty sure I know at least one of them had a cesarean delivery before. So I don't know if that has any impact on what I should do, but I'd love to hear some feedback on that. And then, of course, I'm very behind on reading. I'm caught up with the up through module 4 on the ancient maps reading, but I'm way behind on the other stuff.
Okay. Well, you'll catch up at some point, or you can come back to the reading. That's
Eventually, yeah.
Well, let me ask you about your session. Did you say this afternoon?
Yeah, 5 o'clock today.
Great. That's great timing. So how did you frame it to them? What did you tell them this was about? And
well, they are sister-in-laws, and I told them one of the girls was a previous doula client. And she's pregnant again with her second. So I just let her know that I'm in this training and that I'd love to practice. And she's kind of excited to check it out, but they don't know anything about birthing from within. So I think they're just looking at something fun to do that's birth related. I think it's pretty much all they know.
And they're both pregnant around the same time, and they're
both expecting their babies next month.
Oh, good.
So.
Great.
But they're neither. I only know one of them pretty well because she was my client, and I don't know anything about the other one's birth stories or her experience at all. But I do know that they're not as like emotionally in touch with themselves as that would make this process easier. So I feel like I have a little bit of a challenge in getting their buy-in. I mean, they're very nice, very open people, but I think they're just not really. They haven't really explored any of this yet, so it'll be all an introduction. They've never even heard of it, so
right.
So I feel kind of at a loss.
Yeah. Lauren, do you have any suggestions about where you would start with a group like that who's kind of new to this whole idea of birthing from within? And
sort of, and I'm also sort of in the same boat because I feel that a lot. Like, where do I start? Which one of these things is the best fit? What I've done in the past with 2 clients is just started really broadly, just talking to them about their pregnancy and sort of their journey to where they are right now. Like, I've been in their lives as a doula, so sort of like, what drew you to finding a doula? Like, and then sort of exploring their motivation in that. And I think that was really helpful because I had one person who was really scared of labor and was getting a doula because she was really scared. And I was like, okay, this is a great, we even talked about the, what's the one with the freeze frame and like the
compassion and excavation of fear.
So we did like an excavation of fears thing. Another one was very sort of wanting to know the things to do. So we got to talk a lot about like, where did you learn the things that you wanted to do? And the first birth story was really helpful for that. So it's been different for everyone. And I'm also trying to figure out for myself if there's a better sequence of approach, especially as I think about teaching a class. But so far with everyone that I've been meeting, it just starts with like sort of asking a question or two and then listening and sort of like feeling for what their motivation is, like their like underlying current, and then sort of thinking of something that would fit best with that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's what
I'm hoping that, I mean, that is good. I hadn't even thought to just meet them where they are and ask them, like, what is it? Like, where are you right now? What are you thinking? What do you need? Because I just feel like I need to go in there with like I know what I'm doing, but maybe I need to just go in there and see what needs to be done. So that's good advice. I'm just thinking maybe I'll figure out where they are and see what they need and then just roll with it, I guess, and just hope that the tools pop out of my backpack and then I don't blank and forget everything.
That's the hard thing for me, at least, is like becoming familiar enough with all the processes so that I have them ready to pull out.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm sort of working on, is like flashcards for myself, and just like having them sort of broken down on flashcards that I can look at when I'm not with a client or whatever. But
or even if you had them with you with the client, you know, I think that would be fine. You know, you've especially if you've laid it out to them that you're doing this for practice as well and you're learning some things. I think if you were to kind of have a reference point of, you know, looking at a note card, I think you would I think most new mentors do something along those lines, because it is a lot to ask of yourself to remember, you know, the kind of basic outline or framework for each process.
Yeah. I feel like I also just need a list of solution-focused questions, you know, just like either on notebook, paper, or whatever, so that I can glance at it and remember. Because I feel like as soon as I try this process, I blank. Is there a list somewhere that's already written out so I don't have to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, well, now I have to remember, and I don't off the top of my head, which module has the solution focus, like a very dense resource document on, is it 4?
I know there was like the 10 steps of dialogue.
Yeah, I have to look, but but you could print it off. All those PDFs are downloadable, so you could print it off and then, you know, highlight your favorite ones or whatever. Of course, you know, with solution focused dialogue, the number one important thing is that you're really listening. And so familiarizing yourself with those questions is awesome, because then you start to kind of have them inside of you. And when you're really listening, one will pop out that's actually out of curiosity from you, not because you know it's a good question to ask. But that's not to say that in the beginning it's not, that it's, you know, not okay to have some questions that you might just glance at and feel like, oh, there's a good one, you know, because again, you're practicing, you're learning. Right. That's all good. But you always want to remember that what is true solution-focused dialogue is when you are coming from a place of really hearing what they're saying, and then you can take it one step further and so it's not predetermined what question you might ask. That being said, there are some solution-focused questions that are just kind of good to have in your back pocket, like you said. So yeah, but if you find that document, and if after we get off the call, I can go back and look in the modules too, because right off the top of my head, I can't remember which one that's in, but I think it's in one that you've been.
I know there is it was a 10 steps, but I don't know. I feel like I need to maybe just write it out myself just so it's more fresh in my mind. But I guess the question is, I have 2 questions. One is like, what's just a good way to open the conversation? Do you literally just sit down and say, so where are you right now? Or, I mean, I feel like I'd be like, hi, how are you? Let's sit down and talk. And then how do you start?
Great question. That's a great question. Well, I think what you know, where are you? Where, you know, and that's sort of why we had you start with those interview questions at the very beginning, you know, of like, what do you know to be true about birth? Even some questions like that can get you some information. And even though they feel so vague to you as a mentor, they can be thought-provoking, especially to people like you said, who maybe aren't, you know, as far along in their in their introspection or whatever. So that could be a great question. I think first birth story is usually really interesting for people, and also a great place to start, because they most likely haven't thought of things from that perspective, as far as why they are making choices that they are making, or wanting to avoid certain things. And so I think starting with that as a process early on can be really helpful. The other thing you can ask people which is solution focused and also is good information for you, is something along the lines of, so after these 2 hours we spent together, if you were to walk away with something that felt really helpful to you, what would that be?
You're
You know,
saying ask that towards the beginning or after?
at the beginning, yeah, you might say like, what would make spending this 2 hours for you feel really useful? What, and they might say something like, I'm hoping you'll tell me all the things I need to avoid, whatever. I mean, they might tell you some question that's like, okay, well, we're probably not going to do that. In your mind, you might have that little conversation with yourself, but it gives you some insight as to where they're coming from.
Okay.
And it can help you to validate that and to start from a place of validation. So, you kind of mentioned like feeling really prepared and sitting down like, okay, I've got these 3 things we're going to do today, which makes a lot of sense for you as a new mentor. And what I would recommend is starting, instead of jumping into like the educate place with them, start with validating, which is why we ask these questions, around first birth story, or what would you like to know, or what do you feel like, what's on your mind when you think about the birth being in a month away, what kind of emotions are coming up, or so that gives you an opportunity to listen to what they have to say and to validate back around, how do you know that to be true, or how is that impacting you, or wow, yeah, that's a lot, that you're holding on to. How are you managing to relate to all of that, or just things like that, where you're just building rapport and validating where they're coming from before you go into anything else. Really helps to build a foundation for anything else you might want to offer them as you go. Okay. But I love your idea of doing a pain coping practice, and I love doing a birth art, especially if they're kind of new to birthing from within. That can be really fun. So, like the womb with a view. Again, I
was wondering, what do you think is a good place to start as far as birth art? Because the birth in our culture doesn't really resonate with me, so I know I'm not going to do that one.
Okay.
But what do you think is a good beginner one to lead?
Well, I mean, basically any one that's been offered up to you so far in modules, 1 through 5, I think would be great.
Any of them? Just pick one?
Yeah, well, and again, as you get further into it, you might hear something that they say to you that might feel like, if somebody were to say, I don't know, I'm having a really hard time connecting with the baby, then you might have a light bulb that would go off and like, ooh, womb with a view might be a cool one, because it would give them an opportunity to really check in with the baby and develop, maybe a relationship in a different way. Or somebody might say, I'm trying to think of which other ones.
I like doing the draw yourself as a parent.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think for first time, second time too, I think that could be useful. But I've had some really good conversations about.
Really?
Yeah.
And
that
go ahead.
Like weren't anticipated by me.
Mm. Yeah, sometimes people who are going to have their second baby might say, either that thing around I'm having a hard time connecting with this baby, or I can't imagine how I'm going to be able to, love both these children, or what's my life going to, like they might have some issues like that, anxiety. And so instead, you can just tweak that around not just becoming a parent, but, get them to do a little visualization around like, what does it look like to be a parent to this baby? Who are you with that one, so you could try that out too.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to wing it and hope for the best.
Yeah. You know what
like anxiety. I'm all nervous, and I just feel like I don't know why. It's so stupid to feel that way, but I feel that way.
So we can go into this actually. This might be a good thing for the rest of this call to look at. But what do you normally do for yourself to bring yourself to a place of stepping in and through that anxiety and nervousness and fear?
I avoid it. I just avoid this. Remember, we had this conversation a month ago, and I still haven't done it. I said I'm just going to dive in, and I haven't. So now tonight I'm just going to dive in, and that's what I've done before. But I still feel nervous.
Yeah, totally. Well, that might be a good thing that we can go into here in a little bit. I'm going to say something to add to your nerves. You know what I think you should do is record it.
Like audio record or
audio, or set your phone up to record it. Because, well, multiple reasons. One is, for certification, that is what you'll do, is submit recordings. But now you have the opportunity in Module 5, there is the opportunity to submit a mid-course recording for feedback. And since you have this opportunity in your lap today to try stuff, it doesn't have to be perfect at all, especially the mid-course recording, because the whole point of it would be to say, what happened here, or help me dissect this, or give me some feedback.
Okay.
So I highly recommend just saying, what you want to do if you do that is to ask their permission, obviously, and tell them that it would only be used for teaching purposes for you to learn from. It's not going to go out on the internet or anything like that. But yeah, just set your phone up, push record and forget about it. But I know that's...
As far as just a technical thing of that, how do you do that without filling up all the space on your phone? I don't even know how to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm super not techie person either, but one thing you could do is start and stop the recording if in between things. Like if you take a break, stop and start it up again. So for one thing, it's not like a massive file. And then do you have like a save to the cloud option?
I'm not super techie either. I've used up all of my cloud space with pictures of my kids.
Right. I know how that is.
If you have Google Drive, you can upload it to Google Drive.
Google Drive, I do have that. Okay, I'll research how to do that. So you just record it on your phone and then upload it there?
Yeah, you can even download the Google Drive app on your phone.
And record through Google Drive?
No, just record it on your phone, and then after you're done recording, go to the app, the Google Drive app on your phone, and upload, and then you can select from your library. So you can select it from your video library. Okay. Upload it to the Google Drive, and then you can delete it from your phone.
Okay, I'll try that. I think I could bring an iPad. My kids could live without it for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's helpful actually to have that little conversation, because I'm sure there will be others that are wondering the same thing. It is a technological dilemma sometimes of like what device and all that. But I recommend doing it because it is nerve-wracking usually to record ourselves, especially doing something that we don't feel like super confident in. But that's how you're going to get support and feedback, and so that's my pitch for giving it a try to record it. And also, even if something goes wrong and it doesn't work, then this isn't like a situation in which you're going to be super devastated that it didn't work, rather than later on. So kind of maybe work out some of those technological glitches,
And in the video, I'm recording myself, not them, right?
Yes, it doesn't have to be looking at them at all. Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes it's helpful if we can hear both, the audio of both, so that we can talk to you about like, what they said, like, what might you say if you were to do this over again, how might you respond differently? Okay. Something like that. So it's nice to hear the audio, but it doesn't have to be like focused on them. And usually that relieves them as well to know that like they're not even in the screen.
Okay. All right. I'll try it.
Yeah, try it. Or audio recording is fine too. If that's easier, you could do a voice memo or something.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, good. Yeah. You'll have to let us know how it goes and what you tried, and
yeah, if I survive.
if you survive. Here's what I'll tell you. You will survive. Even if you at the end feel like, oh my gosh, that was a disaster, it's not going to kill you.
Yeah, that's true.
I can almost guarantee that. Yeah. And you'll learn something from it, and you'll figure out what you might want to do differently next time.
Okay. I'm going to try to record a meeting next Friday. So I will.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah, it's so great. And even if it's if you're not super happy with it, at this point in the game, like let's talk about it. Let's pick it apart and figure out what can be done differently, so that it's not at the end of the course when you're submitting your first recording and getting feedback, and then at that point feeling like, oh man, I have so much more to work on. Like, let's do it now. Okay. So cool. So Nikki, you haven't opened Module 5 yet. You just finished the assessment for 4, you said. Right. Mm-hmm. And Lauren, it sounds like you have gotten into 5. You had a little extra time to do that. So you've tried the excavation of fears.
Yeah.
How'd it go? So wait, let me hold your thought because I do want to hear that, but I'm going to back it up for Nikki and anyone else who doesn't know what we're talking about yet.
Sure.
So in Module 5, you will find one of the larger nuggets of Module 5 is a process we call the compassionate and courageous excavation of fear. And it's basically a solution-focused dialogue around people's fears and what's coming up for them and what they're hoping won't happen, and really diving into not just the what of it, but the why and the how and what it means for them and what kind of stories they're telling themselves it means about them, and all of this on a much deeper level than just why are you afraid of that, or oh, don't worry, it won't happen kind of conversation around fear. But like, let's look at this, let's see what this is about and go into it. So that's what's coming up, and it's a really rich practice, and it can be done in a kind of a casual way where you're sort of just having a conversation with someone, or it could be very structured, like where you're actually having them do some journaling and processing it one step at a time. So there's a map for it, you'll find that. But yeah, so tell us a little bit, Lauren, about how it went for you when you gave it a try, and what, if anything, were some of your learnings that you took away.
I think I'm just looking over my notes. I think it's super relevant to my practice because I think that a lot of people are, like, it talks about the under worrier or the over worry, like they're either ignoring something because they're afraid of it and not worrying about it at all, or they're like obsessively thinking about something, and that's their way of taking care of it, of that thing, is like worrying about it. I just spent the past month with my friend who had a baby, and I was going to do recordings with her because I flew to New York a week before she was due, and her water broke the morning after I arrived.
Okay.
So
jumped right in.
Baby came like a week and some early, and didn't get to record any birth preparation videos with her, but we had been doing them. But she found herself, so I stayed with her for 4 weeks postpartum, and she thought she has depression and anxiety, and she is taking medication for that, and really thought that she was going to skew towards depression, and really skewed towards anxiety in her postpartum, and was feeling really frozen by a lot of fear that she was having. And so I was able to do this with her like many times. I'm trying to think of a specific one we did. Oh, she was having a lot of anxiety about letting other people hold her baby.
Okay.
And I talked to her about, because she wasn't worried about me holding her baby. She wasn't worried about her husband holding her baby. But even like the pediatrician holding her baby, or her friends who were coming over, her family that was coming over. And when I explained I sort of explained the process to her, and then we sort of did it. And I got to I asked her what was the frame in her mind when she was picturing this fear. What was she thinking about, and what was she feeling? And her fear wasn't even, in my head, I was like, oh, the fear is going to be someone dropping the baby or something. That was my
rational,
right? And her idea was more, I can't think of it exactly because I was also very sleep deprived at this point, but it was more like the baby was uncomfortable, or the baby was wondering where his mom was, or the baby, I think mostly just the baby was like uncomfortable and scared. And wanting his mom and not knowing where she was, and sort of this thing. So we talked about this a lot. sort of described this image. She imagined like the person she feared the most holding her baby, which was one of her friends who she didn't trust, and asked her what, like, if this moment were to occur, if this moment were happening, what could you do?
Mm-hmm.
What is one thing that you could do that would connect you with yourself or your partner or your baby?
Mm-hmm.
And she struggled with this a lot because she like wanted to like rescue her baby in the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ended up just saying that she would want to hold hands with her husband, like take her husband's hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, so what would that, what would that mean to you? And she ended up saying like she would feel like she wasn't alone in like watching her baby suffer in the arms of another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most specific one I can remember. I'm trying to look at my notes.
Well, that sounds like a great example, and it really brings up this piece around, which is why we do this process with people, is because, well, especially prenatally, because what we know to be true is about fear prenatally is that it can impact people's ability to take action to help really prevent trauma from them later on in the birth or postpartum, partly because what we see and know is that usually fear causes an immobilized state, where you're just frozen. And people later looking back on a situation, especially if they feel traumatized by it, will often identify the fact it's not necessarily that they had an epidural or that they had a cesarean birth even, it's that they have a lot of blame for themselves, where they feel like, why didn't I say no, or why didn't I stand up, or why didn't I, or I should have, or I'm not a good mother. Whatever the storyline is, that's actually what's traumatizing to people, is that place of being immobilized and then the story that we tell ourselves. And so what we want to get people through this process, even if it's in kind of a conversational format, is to see what's one little action that they could take that would shift their story about themselves. It doesn't change the situation necessarily. We're not like swooping in like Wonder Woman, like, here to save the day and make this not happen, or, make the doctor do something different, or make the situation for the baby completely different. It's not that. It's what's one little action you can take that makes your story about yourself shift. And it usually involves something tiny, like what you said for your friend around like just taking her husband's hand. So she knows she's not alone, right? Because she probably was telling herself a story around like, either that she's like in this alone and it's too much and she's overwhelmed and therefore she's not a good mother and her baby's going to feel neglected, and, on and on and on. That's what we do with our fear, is spiral it. Whereas if she can bring herself back to the present moment by grabbing her partner's hand and taking a breath, or whatever the tiny action is, she may slow that process of spinning and therefore, the angst that causes. So that's a great example of just something small, because sometimes people will feel like, I don't know, I can't imagine what I would do, and so we want to really bring them back to like, well, what's the tiny thing? One little tiny step you could take that would bring you, like you said, bring you back to yourself, have you show up for yourself in that moment, or for your baby. Yeah. Cool. Good for you. Way to go in trying it.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it is really good. Well, I think I said this, last time we talked about this, Lauren, but I'll say it again because these are new people hearing it, is that, pretty much everybody who's preparing for birth has some element, some range of fear. Sometimes it's really a lot where they're immobilized already by it. Other times it's just like these lurking things that they are afraid of. But I could say I haven't met anyone who's approaching a birth or postpartum time that doesn't have something that they're worried about or hoping won't happen. you know. And sometimes every now and then you'll get somebody who says, I'm just going with the flow and I'm not afraid of anything. And, you know, that's kind of a red flag too, because you're like, is that really true? Maybe if they've done a lot of work, it might be. But, you know, even those people who say that might actually be afraid of the fear of being afraid, if you know what I mean. Acknowledging, saying it out loud that they're afraid, because what does that mean? Again, it comes back to this, what does it mean about them? So if they admit to being afraid, then they're probably telling themselves some story about how this means that they might not be a good parent, or they won't be able to handle it, or something bad will happen, and, you know, whatever the cascading flow of thoughts is. But anyways, it's a very important process to practice and learn and be able to pull out of your backpack, because as we know, as we work with expecting parents, is that usually it comes up at some point, especially if we work with them more than once, where you will hear in their words either the thing they're hoping won't happen, the thing they're really afraid of, whatever, however they verbalize it. When your radar is tuned to it, and especially if you feel like you kind of have something you can do with that. Because culturally, what we tend to do with people when they express their fears is what? What do we usually do in our culture?
Try to make them feel like everything's okay and there's nothing to be afraid of.
Exactly. We try to assuage it and say, hey, oh, that will not happen, or don't worry about it, or just, you know, don't focus on it.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
If you do these things, or if you don't do these things, statistically, it won't happen.
Right. And sometimes it can be realistically sort of helpful for people to know that you know, in the scheme of things, you know, because sometimes people will be holding on to something that feels worrisome to them that really truly is unlikely. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, and it doesn't mean their fear isn't real. So just telling them not to worry about it because it's very rare. I mean, I'm sure you could relate to that in your own life. Like when somebody's like, oh, don't worry about that. It kind of either makes you sort of angry on the inside, or it almost exacerbates the fear because you feel so unvalidated and so kind of alone in it. So yeah, so we either try to make people feel better, or we try to give them the tools of how to avoid it, which again, we're not magic. So none of us have the tools that we can give somebody that will make the thing they're afraid of not happen. You know, it's just not the way the world works, unfortunately, sometimes. But so yeah, so instead of doing one of those two things, we have another tool now, which is to basically encourage them to look at it in the eyes, and to even, you know, acknowledge that sometimes it's scary to look it in the eyes because it feels so big. But if we look it in the eyes and take a look under a magnifying glass, what is it about this that worries me? What am I afraid of, and why? The question it comes back to is, what am I telling myself this situation would mean about me? If this were to happen, what would I think that this means about me as a parent, as a mentor, as a doula, whatever, however you're working with this process? That's the question, because that's what they're actually wanting to avoid. If we slow it down and look at it really deeply, you know, they might think they're wanting to avoid an epidural, but more likely what they're really wanting to avoid is the belief that they weren't strong enough, or the belief that they couldn't handle it, or the belief that they were weak, or the belief that they're not a good parent because they just did that to their child. Right? That's what they're afraid of on a deeper level. And so if we can get them to look at that, because what we can do is help create a shift so that they acknowledge that that is actually a totally untrue statement. That our inner judge usually lies to us about, you know, our value in the world, or our value, or our capabilities as a parent, or a doula, or a mentor. Yeah. Well, I'd like to share this. I'd like to share this Michael Meade quote. Lauren, you've heard it before, and anyone from first cohort who listens will have heard this, but I find it to be really interesting. And again, it's a little bit long, so I'll share it with you in the Facebook group because you might want to reference it. Sometimes it's helpful when you're building a framework for people around talking about fear. It can be helpful to pull out, an interesting quote or something that can hook your audience, so to speak. Okay, so this is Michael Meade. He's written many things. This comes from a piece that's called "Why the World Doesn't End: Tales of a Renewal in Times of Loss." Okay, so what he says is, fear is an old word that derives from the same roots that give us fare, F-A-R-E, as in thoroughfare. Although it often causes people to run away from troubling situations, at a deeper level, fear means to go through it. The hidden purpose of fear involves bringing us closer to natural instincts for survival, but also for awakening inner resources and sharpening our intelligence when faced with true danger and the basic need to change. I love this piece about awakening the natural instincts for survival. Like, that's all, what we're afraid of is like, what if we can't pull out our natural instinct for survival? Like, what if we die? Like you were saying, Nikki, what if I don't survive? In the end, what we fear will not go away, for it indicates what we must go through in order to awaken, become more genuine, and live more fully. The problem is that we tend to be most afraid of what our own souls require of us. Often our deepest fear is that we might become who we are intended to be, who we already are at our core. For becoming who we truly are requires the greatest amount of change. Run towards the roar, the old people used to tell the young ones. When faced with great danger and when people panic and seek a false sense of safety, run towards the roaring and go where your fear asks you to go. For only in facing your fears can you find some safety and a way through. When the world rattles and the end seems near, go towards the roar. That's Michael Meade. I just love that. Go towards the roar. I mean, we are not culturalized to do that. Our unconditioned, our conditioning tells us, keep ourselves safe, turn from what we're afraid of. But if we turn towards it, and if we guide the people we're working with to turn towards it and look at it and peel back some layers, then they actually have coping mechanisms. Whether or not that actual thing happens, they have coping skills for other things that are hard or scary or require them to dig deep, because they looked at it and didn't just get sort of fed that story of you'll be fine, don't worry about it. Right? Because that's not awakening the adult archetypes in them. That's just feeding the child a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Right? Oh, you're fine. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It probably won't happen. Yeah. So what does this bring up for you when you think about talking to people and working with people who are pregnant or postpartum around around fear? Like, what does it mean? What comes up for you as a mentor or a doula when you think about, meeting people where they are in a place of fear or angst or worry?
Well, I feel like in my own experience, a lot of people aren't really willing to admit that they're afraid of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if they'll say, oh, well, I'd like to avoid this or I'd like to avoid that, but I haven't really had anyone say I'm really afraid of something.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what it brings up for me exactly, but I just kind of feel like it's maybe just identifying the fear is going to be the harder part.
That's interesting. Yeah. And that could be, again, in and of itself, an avoidance on their part, either telling themselves that they're really not worried about anything, or they're just not going there, which is fine. And that is a coping mechanism too. But if there's underlying fear or concern or worry, it doesn't go away by not thinking about it. We often use the example of like a prehistoric person who might have been giving birth out in the wild somewhere, and someone who didn't have books and YouTube and videos and birth classes and doulas, and they didn't have all the information about what was happening, but they had the same part of the brain functioning that we have that functions in birth, which is the mammalian brain of like, what needs to happen in order for me to be safe and for this baby to be protected. And if that prehistoric person was hearing some rustling over in the bushes, their immediate reaction is adrenaline, fear, because they're thinking, is this a predator? Is this something that's going to come and eat me or eat my baby? And so, as we know, as birth professionals, adrenaline can really slow down a birth process. If you watch nature videos, you can even see sometimes if a predator comes, it'll actually stop labor. And we have that same mechanism as humans, only we have a lot more information, so we get a lot more wrapped up in story about it. But the truth is, our body is doing a fundamental assessment of, am I safe? Is this a safe place? And so for people who think, I'm just not going to worry about my fears, then they might still hear this rustling over here in the bushes. They don't know if it's actually real or not, but they don't want to look. And what's weird about the brain is the brain doesn't care if it's actually a predator or if it's just the wind. If you hear the rustling, it's going to release adrenaline, right? And so you can kind of explain this to parents, especially if they're like, I don't want to I don't want to talk about fear because I'm afraid it'll make it happen. You can kind of explain this physiology around adrenaline, that we are mammals, and the rustling in the bushes doesn't just go away. And our brain can't interpret whether it's a predator or not. It just hears the signal and it sends the hormone, right? And so if instead, when we're prenatally able to safely look over at the bushes and say, is this a predator? And what would I do if it was? How would I handle this? What does it mean about me that my predator is lurking over here? Whatever it is. But if we talk to people about the physiology of fear, it can be motivating for them to walk into it a little bit more, rather than us saying, oh, it's really important for us to talk about fears today, because then you'll probably be met with some resistance, especially, Nikki, if people are like not bringing it up on their own. The other thing that you can bring up with people, or a way to open the door to that conversation, is to ask them a really wide spectrum of possibilities around. So, you might even say, so let's talk about some things you're hoping won't happen. What would you consider to be some unwished for situations? And then you can give you can give a range. Like, some people are really hoping that, I often use the example of they don't want to forget their slippers, because they really envision themselves walking around in the hospital in their slippers. And if they forgot their slippers, they would be really disappointed. So that's one end of the spectrum, right? Pretty mild, but sometimes people, that's bugging them, all the way up to, I'm afraid I might die. Or what if my baby dies? Or what if my partner dies? Right? So you've got this huge spectrum. We don't need to ask people like, what is your worst fear? You don't have to go there, because usually once you start getting the conversation going, you'll find, for one thing, that people tend to have pretty mid-range concerns. And again, the fear really isn't about the thing. The fear is about the story, what it means about them. So we usually, once you start uncovering a few things, you're going to start to find the undercurrent story that is one of their old agreements. But if you're going to do this process, you could ask people, you know, hey, I'm going to give you a note card, and I'd like you to write, just start jotting down, you know, anywhere on the spectrum, some things that you're hoping won't happen, ranging from very mild to maybe more significant concerns. And you can also make an assessment for yourself about your community. Sometimes the actual word fear is triggering for people, right? And they might all just shut down right away. So you might just use the word concern or worry or something you're hoping to avoid. And then you can mention that piece that I just read about what fear, where the word fear comes from. Sometimes that's helpful for people, especially if they're in avoidance. But there's some ways of getting into it that you can start to get people to open up, and then you can move them into the process of getting them to look at it and to identify what they are telling themselves it would mean about them if that happened. And then there's the next step there is asking them to then feel into, what does that feel like in your body to believe that about yourself? And then, of course, we don't want to just leave them there, right? And so we can ask them, like, what's the action you might be able to take, like you did, Lauren? What's an action you might be able to take if that were to happen that would bring you back to yourself? Because what we're trying to do here is activate some compassion for themselves. And then in asking them that action, I'm kind of going through the map here for you, but you can come back to it when you are looking at the map as well. But when you ask them about the action, you might ask themselves, so what part of yourself would allow you to take that action? So I don't know if you asked her that question, Lauren, but you might, you know, a further place to go with her would have been like, what part of you would know to take his hand in that moment? You know, how would you know to do that? And it's probably something in her like some compassion for myself, or because I would know that I needed to feel connected, right? And then when you get them to identify what allows them to take that little step, you're just one step away now from getting them to see this from a new angle. It's much more true. Oh, so you would know that you need to be connected in this moment. So you actually aren't alone. Huh. Right? How much more true is it that you're actually not alone? Yeah, and then you can go back and have them compare a new belief to the old belief. And a lot of times it's a pretty awakening for them to see how vicious their inner judge was being towards them, that it meant they were going to be a bad parent or something. Because if she realizes, actually, you know, I'm actually looking out for my son by wanting him to be safe. And that doesn't mean I need to rescue him from every situation, but it means that I'm connected to him because I'm actually a good mother. Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah.
This has been helpful for me to think about unwished for events as a doula and as a new birth mentor, because it definitely made me think about how I would handle certain situations that I haven't considered, but just sort of wished they wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. And so I do feel more not prepared, but having considered them feels better than not.
Yes, exactly. Well, we do this with ourselves as birth professionals, big time, you know, is holding a story about what it would mean for us if a client ran into this problem or that problem, or like Nikki, what you were talking about earlier, like what if, you know, I don't know if this has crossed your mind, but I certainly know it has crossed mine and over the past gazillion years, is like, what if I blank? Mm-hmm. What if I'm sitting in front of these people and nothing comes? to mind.
Well, that is literally what happens to me. And I figured out like when I get nervous or scared or overwhelmed, my adrenaline kicks in and it's fight, flight, or freeze. I freeze and forget it. Forget everything.
Right. Right. Well, that's a physiological reaction.
Mm-hmm. How do you avoid that?
Right. Well, how have you avoided that in the past? You must have had even if it's your go-to, there must have been something happen in your life where you found yourself, historically anyways, doing one little tiny thing to move out of freeze.
Well, I tell you, it just dawned on me that I just did it on Saturday. My brother got married and I did a speech at his wedding and I was terrified. And remember our last call, we figured out my heart's question and everything. It had to do with me taking up other people's time. Mm-hmm. And I wrote the speech and I read it and it was 4.5 minutes long. And my biggest fear was that the whole crowd was going to be bored because my speech was so long and I was taking up their time with what I wanted to say to my brother. Yeah. And I even said to my brother and the officiant, I was like, how can I trim this down? I got to make this shorter. My brother was like, you're my sister. Just say it. Everyone wants to hear what you have to say. And I was like, even when I stood up, I was looking through my words, trying to figure out where I could cut it. Mm-hmm. But what I did was I just dove in. I dove in and stood up and talked, even though I was focused on my voice sounds weird in the microphone. And I was looking at my brother and his now husband's eyes and like thinking like, are they bored with my own speech? And are they enjoying this? And, they're nodding, smiling, and they've got tears in their eyes, but I'm still judging myself the whole time.
You're getting all the clues and you're still judging yourself.
And I'm still judging. I'm still thinking, how much faster can I get through this? I'm anxiety. And I was looking around the crowd and I could see everyone's tears in their eyes. So I was like, obviously this is going all right. But I still was like, I'm taking too long. My big fear was taking too long. Yeah. But everyone else took just as long. So I don't know. I recognized the fear was irrational. I identified that even while I was doing it, but I still felt it. And so.
Well, that is such a really amazing story and such an important point. None of this, it's kind of like our pain coping practices. We're not trying to take away the pain. We're not believing that we're just, by doing this, we're not going to be afraid. Mm-hmm. That would be, if we set people up to say like, oh, cool, we're going to do this process so you don't have any fear in your birth, or so that when the thing happens that you're afraid of, you're not going to feel fear. That is ridiculous. Of course you're going to feel fear. The difference is that you can take the step into it. You can do what needs to be done. That's the warrior part. You were an absolute warrior. You were in your fear. You were doing what you were afraid of doing. You were receiving input that you were doing a great job and you were still telling yourself it wasn't right or enough, or you were talking too long, and you kept doing it. You kept doing what needed to be done.
Yeah, I was so relieved when it was over.
Sure. Apply that exactly, right? And you did it. And apply that to a birthing person, right? Who's afraid of the pain. Let's just use that as an example. Like, giving them some strategies to figure out how they're going to move through it when it starts to feel scary is really, really different than expecting them to either not feel the fear when it arises or to be able to avoid it. One or the other. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about being able to walk into the fire.
Well, I've gotten quite a few of my doula clients through hypnobirthing where which I used to really love hypnobirthing, but now I'm not loving it as much because the general philosophy is like to separate yourself from the pain and the fear, and just it's almost like I'm going to go into this little dream world and that's not real anymore. Right. And I've had so many clients that said like, once I got in there, I felt it. Then I was like, oh, throw that out the window. We're just going to do this. And they get epidurals and C-sections, so I think it's really important to prepare for actually experiencing physical and emotional pain and fear.
Exactly. And not preparing for it to not happen. Mm-hmm. Thinking if I do X, Y, and Z, it won't happen, or I'll just be fine with it, because that's just not a fair expectation of ourselves. I love your story of your speech because you were still uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hard to remember it. The adrenaline kicked
right? You kind of left your body, probably. That's what happens to me sometimes with public speaking. I get down like, I have no idea what I said, but I hope it was fine. But you were still uncomfortable, and yet you did what needed to happen. Did what you needed to do. And that's what we want to expect from our parents. And we want them to expect from themselves, because then what I hear in your voice is some compassion for yourself. You might still have had some judging voices around it. Maybe it was too long, but I also hear you say and feel that you did what you needed to do. I almost feel you feel a little proud of yourself for doing it.
Yeah, I totally do, because I'm a very introverted person that does not speak in front of a crowd, and this was 300 people. So
Exactly. So that's the whole. Hi, Carrie.
hi.
That we're talking about fear, talking about fear with parents. And Nikki just gave this great story about giving a speech at her brother's wedding when she was so terrified. And anyways, I was just commenting to her about how we're not trying to make it go away. We're trying to allow ourselves and the people we work with to be able to take a step with some compassion for themselves, touching into their inner resources, and knowing that it's still going to be hard, or it still might even be scary, but it doesn't mean that we're a failure or that we can't do it, or it's not. The story that we tell ourselves is what's not true. The fact that it is still scary, that might actually be true. I mean, a lot of things that happen in birth are actually scary. It's true. That is real. But whether or not we have coping mechanisms and we can tell ourselves that we're worthy and lovable, even in the midst of that scary ass situation, in front of giving a speech, you were so lovable. And I can feel the love you had for yourself in that moment and for your brother. And that's such a beautiful example of it.
Well, and I think everything you just said is very true, which it's very difficult for me as a person to have compassion for myself and to say, yeah, I did a great job. And how this would relate to birth as well is afterwards, so many people came up and complimented me and told me blah, 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 all these great, beautiful things.
Right.
Oh my God. So the validation was right there. And so same thing when when someone gives birth and they do it, no matter what the outcome is, to just validate them and say, oh my God, you were so scared, but you did it and you faced it. And,
And I love what you're saying. It's so applicable to birth, right? Because how when people feel like they just walked through the fire and everybody on the other side tells them like, wow, you did such a great job. You're so awesome. You're such a warrior, whatever. If they don't feel it in themselves, it washes right off of them. But if you're able to validate the fact that they took that really hard first step, or you watch them, step right into the fire of it, it's really different than just a pat on the back. But if you're actually validating their ability to do what they needed to do, that warrior in them, but without just naming it and giving them a pat and a kind of false accolades. So I don't know, how did it feel for you when people told you did a good job? Could you hear them?
Well, at first I thought it was just empty compliments, like, hey, great job, you did a great speech. But then I had people come to me in tears, and people asked for it and said, they've been married for so long that I had reminded them. They gave me specific feedback. You reminded me of what I'd forgotten.
Yes.
Some people go, oh, hey, great job, that was cool. And then some people were like, this is how it affected me. And so when I got that more personalized feedback, I was like, holy shit, like maybe it actually was good, like maybe I actually did okay. It wasn't just me, blathering on, so exactly. It took specific feedback to make me feel very confident that it actually was good.
Exactly. So this is such a great example. And even though it's not specifically birth related, it's so great because, you're talking about so many of these pieces that we're talking about when we work with parents. It's like not trying to make it go away, having the wherewithal to take the one little step of just getting up to the mic, whatever that might look like in the birth experience. Just get up to the mic and open your mouth and start speaking. Mm-hmm. Trust yourself enough to do that. Doesn't mean you have to trust the whole thing to be fine. It can still be uncomfortable. And then this piece on the other side is so poignant, really, because it's also culturally very, our tendency culturally is to just tell people how awesome they are, or how great it went. And if people don't really feel that, then it's just a false accolade, really. So cool.
Thank you
Thanks
for letting me share that. And sorry for the bad word there. Just slipped out.
It's all good. So, okay, my next question for you, though, Nikki, is going to come back to your session this afternoon. So how might what you learned from your experience at your brother's wedding this past weekend and this conversation we're having right now, how might that impact you this afternoon? Nikki has a
you bringing it full circle.
What's that?
I said, look at you bringing it full circle.
That's right.
Gosh, I think, well, first of all, I'm just going to have to dive in. There's no doubt about that. And I have to put the insecurities aside for that couple of hours and fake it till I make it. And then, just believe that they're not judging me the same way I'm judging myself. And then, I don't want to hope for feedback. I don't want to feel like a needy puppy that needs a pat on the back. Right. But I think I just need to try to trust myself a little bit more. And, maybe I could just take that feeling I got from this weekend and, keep that like just a little secret in my pocket that I can do this, So
if you were to keep that as your little secret in your pocket, how would that impact your ability to step in with them this afternoon if you have that in your pocket?
Well, I think it just give myself the grace to know that I just did this in front of 300 people, so I can handle it in front of 2. Mm-hmm. Like I've done a big thing. I just have to take it and believe that I can do a smaller thing. And just, my one little step is just going to be to knock on the door and say, hey, let's get started. But I feel like I'm probably going to have like that shutout adrenaline rush mode the whole time, but maybe not. I don't know what to expect. And so I need to not have expectations, first of all, I guess, and just believe that I have something to offer, even if I don't know exactly what it is.
Absolutely. And if you're swimming in adrenaline the whole time, is that going to be a problem for you?
Probably. I don't know.
No, I don't know. I don't know that it would be. You were swimming in adrenaline when you gave your speech. It's a real thing. Like just because you are telling yourself right now that you got it, doesn't mean it might not still be uncomfortable, or that you might not still have moments of fear. That you can do both. You can do it, and you can also be afraid and uncomfortable.
Yeah, I feel like when I am swimming in the adrenaline, I just go on autopilot. And so that's why, like this weekend, I had my notes. So I feel like if I have, like Lauren was suggesting, some note cards or just something, so that when the adrenaline kicks in and I can't remember what I was going to say next, that I just have like a little visual reminder to just go with the flow.
Absolutely. I love that.
Something that helped me too, Nikki, was when I started doing this birthing from within process and stopped showing up at prenatal meetings feeling like I was going to like present information and then leave. It took away a lot of the performance anxiety for me, because the first thing I'm doing is I'm showing up to like listen. And I think if you just ask some questions and are able to like be present in the listening and having like them guide you, maybe it'll shift your adrenaline response a little bit. I know it worked with me, because I went from being like a presenter with the gift of information, and I was either right or wrong, or it was like helpful or not helpful, and then leaving. And then it became so much more like collaborative. And and slowing down and not thinking that like I was giving them something, like I was that helped. I hope it goes well.
Yeah, so just go with the spirit of curiosity. That is very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're speaking to is mentoring. It's really different than teaching, and it's really different than presenting. So going in there with that spirit of curiosity, that knowing that what they need and want is a mentor, and you can do that because you have, what that involves is exactly what Lauren just said: slowing down, listening. You have some things you can offer them, and I hope you pull out a few, processes that you can try out. And and that's it. And there will be moments maybe where your mind goes blank and you just want to reassess. And that's why having, the practicality of having some note cards, that's awesome. Nobody's asking you to memorize all this stuff right now. Ultimately you'll be coming straight from your heart. And even so, I've been doing this for 17 years and I still sometimes will have a note card to keep me on track or to remind me of which process I wanted to do, or, something like that. I think that's really normal. We're human, or we only can hold so much information in our brain. So I think having that as an expectation is fine. And especially if that allows you to take a breath and settle in and listen and not feel like you have to be like trying to remember everything that you're going to do. Yeah, I think that sounds like.
I also have to remember, they're doing me a favor by helping me practice. I'm doing them a favor by doing this for them as well. So it's not like they paid me and I need to give them their money's worth. I need to let myself learn through the practice and not worry about what they necessarily get out of it. I'm hoping they get something out of it, but I have to remember that this is actually a process for me this time. So once I get a little further along, then maybe I'll be a little more concerned about what they get out of it. But at this point, I need to remember that I'm practicing too. So
practicing, and even just sitting with pregnant people and just having a conversation, especially if you're coming from a somewhat solution-focused angle, that's going to give them something that if they hadn't sat with you, they wouldn't have gotten. Mm-hmm. So at the bare minimum, yes, you will get something and you'll get this opportunity to practice, and they'll get something that they wouldn't have gotten if they didn't do this at all, right? So you can always know that. And also people in our culture are not used to getting something different than people shoving information at them or telling them their own stories or whatever. So if you just shift that a little bit, already it will be something new and different for them. Yeah. And
I'll try to report back later.
Yeah. And that question I brought up at the beginning of asking them, like, if you were to get something that would be really helpful for you out of this time together, what would that be? And then you can kind of be holding that in the back of your mind too. And then at the end, you can check in. So, what do you feel like your takeaways from our time together were? And it might just be interesting information. It doesn't have to be feedback about how good you did, but what they get out of it really out of a place of curiosity. Yeah. Cool.
I often would remind myself and my students that people, if you're working as a doula, they don't know what a doula visit is supposed to be like. So they can't say, like, she's doing it wrong. And people do have ideas, though, often about birth classes. But as soon as you make them realize, whoa, this isn't your average birth class or a mentoring session or whatever they're calling it, you get their attention and they're not going like, you are doing this all wrong. So I just, remind yourself of that as well when you walk in, and they will, I'm certain, be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool. Well, any other things that, Lauren, since I know you've opened module 5, is there anything in there that you wanted to ask a question about or to clarify? And we can go back to if there's anything from previous modules that are hanging out there that you'd like to clarify.
I'm wondering if anyone would, because I've been thinking about the mechanics of birth and making a module about that, and I'm wondering if anyone would want to share those, like maybe in the Facebook group or something.
Like the nuts and bolts pieces?
Yeah, because I think part of it was like, make a module about the physiology of birth. I'm just going through my notes.
Mm-hmm. Carrie, you added 2. So this is one of the benefits for you now, Lauren, of being in this new cohort, is that we're doing a combo with the doula content. And so I think if you go back up to the top of the course under module 2, is that right, Carrie? Oh, I think you're muted, Carrie. I can see your mouth moving, but
Right, I know. Sorry, I'm in the course right now looking for where that module is. So
we've added a bunch of that kind of content, so you can get some foundational material for creating a module.
helpful because like I have my own
Yeah.
spiel, but see someone like to see Carrie do it was great. And you said there's more in earlier modules also?
Well, we added some additional content that's more comes from the doula course or the doula track that has more around physiology of labor, mechanics of birth, that type of
Well, I think Erica isn't
Or was it
mechanics
unrelated?
of birth just in the regular.
I'm
It
not really.
sounds like you saw that, Lauren, the recording of me, the video.
Oh, okay.
In
Well,
5.
oh, is it in module 5? I don't have that open right now, so I'm not seeing it. But why don't you, are you kind of asking like how other people present that? And
Well, I think what I'm holistically asking, and maybe this is later, is sort of structuring a course and what are some other people's ideas about what that would look like, and what are my own ideas about what that would look like, and I'm assuming it's sort of like a trial and error sort of thing. But
and that will come in a later module around actually like structuring a course. But I will put a plug out for connecting with Marissa in this cohort. I think I might have connected you guys via email, but she's doing some workshops to practice these things. And she might be a good one to touch base with around like what's she doing, like if she puts together a workshop, like what's she including, and if that's what you're asking for. And also just ask that question in the Facebook group and see if other people have tried out leading a module that's because I'm not sure if this is the way you're asking, but I'm kind of intuiting it a little bit, which is around like, how do you make it so that it's not like what you were talking about? Like, I'm here to share all this information with you, but how do you make it into kind of like a birthing from within style, which is still including information that people want to know, and yet how to present that in a way that is solution focused and in a mentoring framework. So
yeah, so one of the things that people might show a video, like just a facts video, like stages of labor, and then have a conversation after it. Or I remember often I would say, so how many of you know like how the baby gets out, or whatever the languaging is that's really that core question, and do you have questions about it, and just go from there. So it's more like a question and answer dialogue thing. What do you already know? What don't you know? Or what do you have questions about? You could, and then that could lead into kind of doing the demo with the doll and baby if that's appropriate for your audience. But also it's a nice segue into using the labyrinth of birth, which doesn't talk about the mechanics, but it talks about this, our version of stages of labor, which is about how birth unfolds and what's it like, so that there's the physical experience, but then there's also the larger experience of, navigating the twists and turns.
Right. Yeah. I was just going to suggest using the labyrinth and keeping in mind that sort of that juxtaposition between the gatherer and the hunter-huntress, as far as, because I'll say that the people I've been working with in the last few years, I have been sort of struck by how little they know about birth, actually, which catches me off guard sometimes because I'm like, really? Okay. So I think it's helpful for people because if the gatherer doesn't get some needs met, then they don't just like sit down. Right. They just keep like raising their hand, you know what I mean? So I sometimes find that actually if you just do the demo, if you get, or, kind of just go there with them, like Carrie was saying, like, because I sometimes will ask that question of like, so what do you know about, and a lot of times, especially the men, I will say, are sometimes like, nothing. I know nothing. Because I think our health classes in school these days, like everything's all about pregnancy prevention, and unless they have been someplace progressive, they don't know much about what is happening. And a lot of people, it really helps them to have a visual around the pelvis, and that can really be a solution focused launch pad for further conversation around like, what can you do and what might you try? And, so I don't think it's, I wouldn't want people to feel like mentoring doesn't involve some of that, because it does. And if we pretend that people don't need that information, or we just avoid it because it's kind of annoying to us, because how many times have I told the thing, or, they still have the questions. And it's really hard for them to move on to the hunter huntress warrior around what do they need to do about it, or what does it mean for them about themselves and how they might move through it if they're just kind of stuck in this place, but I don't get it. You know, so that's
do you feel that it's good to recommend to pregnant parents to take like a birthing from within course with us, and in addition to like a hospital childbirth class, or do you feel like overall this is kind of takes the place of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think theoretically a birthing from within class would meet their needs and would give them enough of that to fill their basket that they feel satisfied and educated, but that what they're really getting is what they actually really need, so there's kind of both. I've had people over the years who thought they needed to take both, and a lot of times they end up bailing on the hospital class because they're like, it's so boring, and they're just talking to me about epidurals. And I think in a birthing from within class you could definitely give enough of the physiology, and you could talk about mechanics and so on and so forth, that people feel really satisfied and met with that information. So it's not something I recommend. If somebody feels like they really want or need that, I would validate their desire to get all the information they feel like they need or something like that. But I don't think it's something that is necessary or recommended, because I think as mentors we can do that job.
Yeah, and I think birthing from within has a reputation of being woo-woo, and that there's no content. There's no, meat to it. And certainly in my community in Seattle, that was believed and perpetuated for many years. But I'm feel pretty confident saying that most mentors, especially those who are teaching group classes, they are providing content because we'd be leaving people bereft without it. They would not have some of what they need, because one of the things that we need because of the modern ways of knowing is what's going on inside, how, what is, the mechanics of this. So don't feel like you can't teach content or that you can't answer direct questions, because that would just be shitty. If somebody said, well, tell me about like how an epidural works. And if we were to say, some metaphorical crap, that's going to turn them off, and it's not going to nurture that relationship. And, so if you think about mentoring in outside of birth in another context, especially like the idea that most people have about mentoring is within business. If somebody was to say like, so what skills do I need to, get this job that I want? And we're like, well, just leave it to the universe. That would not be helpful mentoring. And, a mentor, you want your mentor to say, there's this really good program that's going to give you these skills, or here's the book to read, or here's how you do it. So don't shy away from that. Some people like me love doing the demo. You could probably tell my excitement. I love doing that. Others don't, and they use the stages of labor video because it's really good. And it's nice, hard, concrete, but succinct information. And so again, it could be a launching pad for, let me just show you this video, and now let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
The midwife that I worked with at the Brooklyn Birth Center this past month was so in love with birthing from within, and was like so happy that this is what I was doing. And I was talking about the pain coping practice. It was just really nice to just run into someone in the wild who was like
in the wild
from within.
Yay! That we love to hear that. We love to hear that.
And I had one more question. I don't know if this is going to be covered either, but I'm having I had 2 clients who had miscarriages recently, like older clients of mine, past clients. And I'm wondering if there's any modules or any information about any processes around pregnancy loss, or any information specific to that, because it's been coming up so much in my practice that I'm really thinking I need to add something a little more official than people just having my phone number and calling me when it's happening.
Can you say a little bit more about what you would want in a module, or what you'd be looking for?
Yeah. And I'm also happy to collaborate on this in any way if it doesn't exist. I have clients calling me and saying, I was just at a scan, there's no heartbeat. These are the options I'm being presented. I really don't know what to do. What do you think? Or what is your experience with people who have had a DNC? Have you supported people who haven't had the DNC? Should I, I'm being offered Cytotec or misoprostol and I have no idea which one or whatever. It's just like a lot of like, they never considered this would happen, obviously. They're being presented with options, but they're not really understanding what those options entail. And then also I think the emotional component of, and obviously it affects people very differently. Like I just had one client who was really relieved. And I had another client almost, 4 or 5 days earlier who was completely devastated. And yeah, so that's what I'm wondering.
I'd love to add on to that too, because I actually been thinking about this too, because I feel like I've heard a lot of lost stories lately, and a lot of what I've heard is, I don't know what happened. What did I do wrong? So I feel like some of the assumptions, I was trying to listen for assumptions and stuff like that, but I would also like to add on to that. It would be nice to know how to handle those conversations and if there's a way to explore it.
Yeah, that's really good.
So
We don't have a specific module about that right now. I think that it's something that we could put together especially as far as some of the questions like that you're asking, where people want some like information. And then I think some of our other processes, like this excavation of fear, you could actually sort of modify to talk to somebody about, like, what is this bringing up for you? What are you telling yourself that this happened? What does that mean about you? Is that really true? You could do heart's question. I mean, there's things you could do with people that would be sort of nourishing processes in kind of healing that. But as far as a specific module, I don't know, Carrie, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, because I actually offer a course on supporting families in grief, and it covers the whole spectrum of grief, from, being able to conceive, to losing a pregnancy early on, to, stillbirth, and to postpartum trauma, the whole gamut. And the core takeaway is, our role doesn't change. The skills we use are the exact same. The circumstances are different. Right. But because death is probably handled even worse than birth in our culture, people have no experience with it. And then, now we're combining birth and death, and nobody knows how to talk about it. And, so even doulas feel like I don't even know where to begin. So what I can do is pull some things out from that for a module, because I work primarily with doulas, and doulas that's their biggest fear. It's like, what do I do if I go to a birth and the baby dies and I have no idea what to do? And it's like, actually you do, you know exactly what to do. You just don't know, what to do. So, so I can work on pulling some things together. When it comes to the technical things, like, what kind of medications they might be using or doing a DNC, that kind of goes beyond the scope of both, our role as doulas or mentors, but also our role as what we teach within Birthing from Within. But what we could do is work on the questions and the things that we would help our clients to get that information in the moment, because obviously those are really important questions that they have that we can't answer. But it would be good for us to have some background information. And I would love to collaborate with you on that, Lauren. Yeah,
that would be wonderful. I do find that it is very, very similar. And I was just mentoring a doula about the same exact thing, because her huge fear that she was coming to me, brand new doula, is what happens if the baby dies. And that was, it's like, you have the skills. It's the same skills. And I think that's why people are coming to me with their miscarriages. And I just was wondering if there were, I think that would be really good to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be a really important module to include in this certification program, because much as the myth likes to, be pervasive that babies don't die in the United States, we know that that's not true. And that,
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's really helpful to us to hear your questions like that. So that goes for anyone who's listening. If you're, at especially the module 5 point, you're like, kind of midway. and if you're starting to wonder, like, I wonder if this will be covered, ask it, because either it will and we can say yes, like around planning a class, or it might be something that we have on our radar then now and we can add in and, you know, add to a upcoming module or create as a freestanding something or other. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because that, it definitely is something that you know, and it comes up for a lot of parents too, around prenatally being afraid of that kind of thing. And that goes back to our conversation earlier too. The preparation isn't necessarily about preparing to have it not happen, because we don't get to do that, but preparing for what, you know, how you walk through that.
Mm-hmm.
We had that same I just came from our Heart of Mentoring call before. That's why I wasn't here for the first hour. And we had that same conversation about parents' fears and why we address them, and we don't shy away from them. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about the story of Sleeping Beauty and how the gnarly fairy wasn't invited to the party. Well, if you don't invite the gnarly fairy, she's going to make things really gnarly. And so it was and then we had a nice full circle conversation as well. So it was sweet to step in, right in the middle, and have that same issue being discussed.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we have come to the end of our time together. Thank you too for being here, and thanks to those of you who listen to the recording. And so module 5, there's the invitation invitation/request for the mid-module or the mid-course recording for feedback. So I really recommend/ask for you to do that, so we can support you along the way and get you what you need now rather than only at the end. That is my plug for that piece. And let us know if you have questions or comments or need clarifications on things, and keep on keeping on. You guys are doing great. Nikki, let us know how it goes today.
I will. Thank you so much for all the feedback too.
Yeah, you bet. That's what happens when you show up on the call.
I feel like it's always just a therapy session about me, but I'll take it.
That's what we're here to provide.
We're all here for each other. All right, you all have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.